Ed Valentine of Big Blue View joins me as we take a look back at the New York Giants 2022 season and some of the questions that they need to answer in 2023 and beyond. That's coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On podcast family, your team every day. I am Patricia Traynor, your host. And thank you so much for making a Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube your first watch of the day. On today's show, I'm pleased to welcome in good friend. I won't call him old friend because I don't want him to feel bad if I call him old, but good friend, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. How you doing, Eddie?
I'm good, Patty. How are you? It's too early in the show for me to get snarky, so we'll
It's never too early, Ed.
No.
Folks, for those of you who don't know, way back in the day, Ed and I used to co-host a Giants podcast. And then Ed left me, bum that he is.
Yep.
He left me.
I
so
did.
Here we are. We still make guest appearances on each other's shows when time permits. And that old snarky magic that just seemed to work so well comes out, you know?
I can't help it, Patty. You bring it out of me. I just can't help it.
All righty. Well, anyway, Ed, we've got a lot to talk about. The New York Giants season is over. The 2022 season is over. It is on to 2023, turning the page. But before we turn the page here, I want to get your overall assessment on 2022. I mean, a lot of people talk about how it was surprising that the Giants did what they were able to do, that they were able to have a winning record. I know I predicted they would win at least 8 games. I was off by 1. I didn't necessarily predict playoffs. I figured playoffs maybe for next year. But what did you think overall of how the season unfolded?
Well, Patty, I got a kick out of Brian Daboll on Saturday night, walking into the post-game press conference and saying, well, that was a crash landing, because it pretty much was. It was ugly. And the way that I have put it at Big Blue View is, look, Saturday night was a disappointment, but in no way, shape, or form can you look at the 2022 season as being disappointing. It was, in pretty much every way that you can describe it, it was a success. The Giants won more games than people thought that they would. They made the playoffs, which people didn't think they were going to do. We figured out that they have the right head coach, which was a critical thing in 2022. It was more important. In all honesty, I said it all year. The wins and losses weren't the important thing about 2022. Getting to the playoffs was gravy. It was a bonus. It was great. It was a lot of fun. But that wasn't what 2022 was about. The Giants found out that they have the right head coach. We learned that they have the right general manager. They have a quality front office now that has a plan, that has an idea of what it's doing, understands how to evaluate resources, how to divvy things up, how to construct a roster, and they understand, which I always thought Dave Gettleman could evaluate talent, but I never really thought that Dave fully understood roster construction, fully understood how one move affected the next move. I think Joe Shane does. I think it was a success because the Giants needed an answer about Daniel Jones. They needed an answer about whether they could go forward with him, and they got one. They needed an answer about a lot of the young players on their roster, about Dexter Lawrence and other guys, that as to whether they would be worth second contracts. They got that answer. I think they discovered that there was more talent in the cupboard maybe than Joe Shane and Brian Daboll thought there was, when they got here. And maybe some of that talent hadn't been coached properly, hadn't been used properly, but there were more quality players than you might have thought. So in just about every way imaginable, I think that the 2022 season has to be looked at as a success.
Yeah, and if you consider what the goal of the 2022 season, you had a new GM, new coaching staff, new system, some new players brought in. And really this coaching staff, and how familiar were they really with the NFC East? Joe Shane mentioned he was familiar with Philly because obviously Brandon Brown, the assistant GM, came from Philly, but it was a learning process, a feeling out process for a lot of the team, I thought. And the wins and the processes, I think, if anything, showed that these processes can work, that these approaches that they took the first year can work. Now they just have to maybe fine tune a few things and build off of that. So with that said, Ed, I know I mentioned this on your show that's coming out Friday. What is progress for this team moving forward? What would you define as progress? Is it wins? Is it the win-loss record? Is it making the playoffs again? What do you see as being progress for year two?
Well, again, Patty, it's not necessarily about wins and losses. I mean, the bottom line is it would be really nice to see the Giants go from 9-7-1 to 11-5 or 11-6. And that would be really nice. And that's ideal. But for me, I think that progress is, Joe Shane admitted on Monday that there's a talent gap between the Giants and the Eagles, between the Giants and the 49ers, maybe between the Giants and the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buffalo Bills or Cincinnati or whoever. There's a talent gap. I think we knew that. For me, it's, can you go up and down the roster at some point and say, instead of looking at the roster that you look at with the Giants right now, where Joe Shane admittedly had a lot of players that he brought in who are or were 1 year stopgap, sort of fill in the roster, be an adequate player, be a decent fill in for us until we can draft our own player, develop our own player. For me, progress is you continue along this path of filling out the roster with more playmakers, with more guys you want to go forward with long term. Maybe that's more of your own players. Maybe that's a couple of free agents that you're able to go out and get. I don't think Joe Shane's going to go crazy in the free agent market, but I do think it frustrated him that he was more or less scraping the bottom of the barrel and having to sign all these veteran minimum kind of players and couldn't go and get the kind of guys that he wanted. So for me, I think that's progress, is just continuing to fill out this roster and being able to go up and down and say, we're closer in terms of talent. We're getting there. Every year is so different, Patty. You never know what injuries are going to happen. So it's impossible, I think, to say, well, you have to get to 10 wins for progress to be made.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really put a number on it. I mean, it would be nice to say, to aim for 10 wins. I mean, coaches want to win as many games as they can. Obviously, playoffs is always a goal, and certainly winning the Super Bowl always a goal. But, you bring up an interesting point. Joe Shane in his first year, because of the salary cap situation he inherited, had to sign a lot of guys on 1-year deals. Rosters change every year as it is, but do you anticipate there's going to be an upheaval of roster, on this roster, where we see a lot of new faces come next year, maybe on longer term deals or for the long term?
Well, as I said, I don't think that Joe Shane is going to go crazy in the free agent market. Although the Giants have right now, they appear to have, good salary cap health. The fact of the matter is they're going to spend a good chunk of that on Daniel Jones. They're going to spend a good chunk of that on Saquon. They're going to probably spend a good chunk of that to give Dexter Lawrence a contract extension. So they don't have the money to just start writing people blank checks. I think that, and as Brian Daboll said, there's always upheaval. I think that what Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have to do, and I think Joe rightly said the other day, we need a little space. We need a little distance from the season. We need to be able to take the emotion out of it and look at these players and see who we want to go forward with. And the decisions that have to be made. You have to look at some guys like Richie James, like Darius Slayton, who are free agents, like John Feliciano, who's a free agent. And you have to be able to say, okay, these players did a nice job for us in 2022. But is that all they have? Is that the best they can do? Can we do better? And that's the part of it where it's hard because, a guy like Richie James had the best season of his career. But is that an outlier? Can you count on him to continue to do that? Yeah, I think you'll see players who might have had, a productive year for the Giants not come back because the Giants have to take the emotion out of it. They have to be able to look at it and say, is that the best that player can give us? And is that a place where we think we can find a more talented player who might be able to take us a little bit farther? And that's the hard part. You have to look at a player like Nick Gates, for example. Everybody loves Nick Gates. Everybody loves Nick's story. I love the fact that every time I walk by Nick in the locker room, he pats me on the shoulder or gives me a fist bump and says hello. He's a great guy and you love his story and you love his comeback. But is he good enough to give another contract to? Can he play well enough to give another contract to? That's the cold, hard, emotional decision that the Giants have to make, and I don't know the answer. And that's what it comes down to, is just because you like guys like Sterling Shepard, just because you like guys doesn't mean they're guys that you can go forward with. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I think the roster will be much different. I think a lot of the cornerstone guys are going to be the same. Jones, Andrew Thomas, Saquon Barkley, if the Giants can work out, a deal with him, Xavier McKinney, a lot of those, the cornerstone guys that we know about are going to be there. But how the Giants go about trying to fill that talent gap is one of the fascinating things about the offseason.
For sure. Now, coming up next, we're going to talk about the two big fishes, if you will, Saquon and Daniel Jones. Hey, small business owners, if you're looking for the right people to help your small business fire on all cylinders, you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. Post a free job listing in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and the purple hiring hashtag frame to your LinkedIn profile to let everybody know that you're hiring. Over 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn Jobs every week and are just waiting to find opportunities with employers like yours. With LinkedIn Jobs, simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. And as my own small business, I can speak to the effectiveness of LinkedIn Jobs. I'm currently posting a job on LinkedIn Jobs, and I've gotten several qualified candidates that I'm considering to help me over at Giants Country. So if it works for me, it'll work for you. Go ahead and post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you for making a Locked On Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you the local insights you love to the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Patricia Traynor, your host, joined by Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. We are talking Giants. We've just finished talking about the past. We're going to talk about the future. And Ed, one of the more pressing issues for the Giants in the future involve two of their biggest free agents to be, Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. I think we could probably all agree that Jones is the bigger priority, given the amount of money that is probably going to be invested. We won't talk about money because, we've got to obviously sit and give that some thought. But if you're the Giants, do you go short term with Jones, like a 2-3 year deal, or do you go long term with a 5+ year deal?
Well, I think that, to be honest, my thinking on Jones has changed somewhat throughout the course of the season. I get asked all the time, what would you do? And people get mad at me when I'll say, look, it's not time to answer that question yet. It's too early. We don't have all the evidence. And I was asked the Jones question throughout the season, and I kept kind of pushing it off. I said, this is what I would do right now, but we don't have all the evidence yet. So now we have all of the evidence that we're going to get. And I think that for the Giants and for me, the price tag is going to be a lot more than what we thought it was going to be 2 months ago. It's going to take more of a commitment. If I'm the Giants, I still, in an ideal world, I want a 3-year deal. In an ideal world, I want a 3-year deal. I don't want to give him fully guaranteed money. I think that would be silly. You still want a deal that has kind of an expiration date, that has a get out of jail date, if you will. If it doesn't work out, if it goes the way of Blake Bortles, or if it goes the way of Carson Wentz, you want to be able to get away from it. It might cost the Giants a 4th year. I don't know, just because of the way things have gone in recent weeks, and the Minnesota game, the fact that one of the big questions about Daniel Jones was not necessarily is there greatness in Daniel Jones, but one of the big things was, is he a guy who in the big moments, in big games, can be a guy who can win you games? And I think that against Minnesota, he showed that that's in him. Okay. And let's be honest, you can rank Daniel Jones anywhere you want among quarterbacks in the NFL. But the reality of it is, there's probably only 10 or 12 of those guys in the league who can put a game or put a team on his back and win you a game in a big, playoff kind of circumstance like that. And he showed that he's got that capability, and now you have to pay for it. And I think it's probably going to cost the Giants at least a 3 or 4 year deal. I don't want a 5, 6, 7 year deal. I want the shortest deal that you can possibly, get him to sign, because you want to have the ability not to hamstring your franchise if it goes sideways.
When you were listening to Dable speak along with, Shane at their year-end presser, did you kind of get the impression that Dable maybe wasn't as warm on Daniel? I mean, he made a comment, and I'm going to paraphrase here, about, we can all improve. And, that to me, I thought was kind of telling, because, Daniel, this was his first year in the offense, and he did everything asked of him. He made some good throws. He did load the team on his back. He had 5 come from behind game-winning drives. So he showed a lot of progress, highest completion percentage, highest passing yards, lowest career interceptions. But I just got the impression, and I don't know why, that it was like, okay, we're making progress, but I just don't know that I feel that Dable is 100% sold on Daniel Jones just yet. I mean, did you get that impression as well?
Yeah, I don't know. I do remember the comment that Daboll made, Patty, and I don't know if it's Daboll just, not wanting to say too much about the quarterback, not wanting to oversell what Daniel Jones is, not wanting to say something that will put Joe Shane in a position where Daniel Jones' agent can say, well, look at what your head coach said. Look at all the praise he heaped on Daniel. And now you're going to have to pay for that.
Right.
I think that, and the reality of it is, Daboll's seen a lot of quarterbacks. He's seen a lot of good quarterbacks. He knows that Daniel Jones is not the best quarterback in the league. I think he's not going to overstate or oversell what Daniel Jones is. And that was how I took it. I think you don't want to put your organization in a bad spot. You also don't want to give Daniel Jones the upper hand, or you don't want to give Daniel Jones the idea that hey, now you've arrived. Now you're as good as you're ever going to be. You want to hold that out there in front of him that I think you can still be better. And
Right.
maybe that's Brian Daboll sort of trying to help Joe Shane a little bit and still trying to tell Daniel Jones that this was good, but we need more.
Right, right. And Daniel, to his credit, has always been, he's probably coming right back to work after a couple of days of rest to come back and get ready for next year, which, you want to see. I mean, the locker room certainly appreciated him. I mean, there were times after a loss where guys felt despondent because they hadn't done enough for him. But, just before we move on to Saquon, I want to ask you, Ed, where do you think Daniel still needs to take the biggest jump in order to move up in the quarterback hierarchy of the NFL?
Oh, that's a hard question, Patty. That's a hard question because he took so many steps this year. And I think that largely what we saw, I thought, at least in the first half of the year, I thought that, the Giants offense was so run heavy. It was so much, we're not going to expose this quarterback to drop backs on first down all the time. We're going to run the ball as much as we can. We're going to bootleg him out of the pocket. We're going to give him these sort of one read kind of throws, and we're going to throw the ball on our terms when we want to. I thought as the season went along, the last few weeks of the season, the Giants did a whole lot more. We're going to go ahead and throw it on first down. We're going to go ahead and put the ball in Daniel Jones' hands and allow him to try to be the focal point of everything that we do. I still want to see if Daniel Jones, if the Giants can put some better weapons around Daniel Jones, and I still want to see him take advantage of those weapons. Okay, I thought that Daniel Jones did a very good job with what the Giants asked him to do this year in a lot of the schemed throws that Mike Kafka, gave him, scheming wide receivers open, taking care of the football, not forcing things. But I think that the next step for Daniel Jones is if the Giants can get him a more dynamic tight end, if they can get him a big time wide receiver, can he take advantage of those things and make the Giants into a truly dynamic offense, into a truly, top 8, top 10 offense? And I think that's the next step. That's the thing I want to see before you truly say he really is a top 10 quarterback, or whatever, however you want to grade that or rank that. But I think that's still the remaining question for Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. All right, Ed, let's talk about Saquon. Some split decisions here or split opinions. Saquon, there was a report, and I had heard this as well, that the Giants offered him a contract with an APY of $12 million a year, Ralph Facciano of Fox Sports reported that Saquon's looking closer to McCaffrey money, which would be around $16 million, which I just don't think he's going to get. If you're Shane, where do you think the comfort point is? And given how the Giants deployed Saquon last year, mostly as a runner, they didn't deploy him as much as a receiver as I thought they would. Would you go beyond that, too much beyond that 12 million range? And if so, how high would you go with him?
Well, Patty, I absolutely wouldn't go too much beyond that $12 million range. And I think that for me, the cutoff point, look, McCaffrey is at 16 million. Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara are at 15 million. And then we've got the drop off down to, a group of guys, Dalvin Cook and some other guys making around 12. For me, you can't go to 15. You might be able to go to 13 or 14. Again, like we talked about Daniel Jones, again, this can't be a 5-year deal. You can go if you really want to. And look, you have to, I think when you're Joe Shane and when you're the Giants, you have to understand. I mean, I don't have a pipeline to John Mara, but I will bet you that John Mara very, very, very much would like Saquon Barkley to remain with the New York Giants. And when you're Joe Shane and you're negotiating with Saquon Barkley, you have to understand that. You can't just say, you're taking $10 million a year or you're walking away, or that's it. Your walk-away number has to have a little flexibility in it, because I think you know who your owner is and what your owner wants.
Yeah, but Ed, in that regard, do you really want to see? I mean, look, I get it. Excuse me. John Mara is part of owner of the team. I know he's fond of Saquon Barkley, but do you really think he would tell Joe Shane, I want this guy back, make it happen? Do you think he would interfere like that? I mean, I got the impression last year that he backed off. I mean, I don't know how involved he was in the past, but he said when these guys were hired, he said, I will let them do their job unless there is a situation where I feel strongly enough about a guy that they want to bring in and the guy's character just doesn't fit. I mean, so do you really think John Mara would overrule and tell Joe Shane, oh, sorry, you got to raise your walkaway price?
I don't know. I don't know that I want to call it interference, but I think that you understand. I think that ownership would really like to have this guy in place. And I think for me, what I was thinking was, look, if you can make it work at, say, 3 and 39, something like that, where it's a little bit above, the 12 million, acknowledging the fact that the salary cap has gone up since those players signed that deal. You look at the percentage of the salary cap that, the percentage of the salary cap that those guys were taking up when they signed a $12 million deal might not be the same percentage that Barkley would be taking when he signs a $13 million deal, just to use that number. But I think for me, it's about the number of years. You can't give Saquon more than 3 years. I just don't think you can. And because, there was all this stuff on Twitter. In 2018, there was a play the other night when Saquon, went up the middle and he got tackled in the secondary, and people were like, oh, he would have taken that to the house in 2018. And I don't know if that's true. But what I do believe is 2022, 2023 Saquon is not 2018 Saquon. He may not be quite as explosive. But on the flip side of that, what I also saw from Saquon Barkley in 2022 was a lot more willingness to carry the load, to grind out tough yards, to be that guy who said, if you want me to bang the ball up the middle, 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't really want to do that. But if I have to bang into Dalvin Tomlinson and push him into the end zone, to get these 2 yards, I'm going to do that. I think he would have tried to jump over the guy 2 years ago, and that may or may not have worked, but he's different. Running backs age, they don't stay the same. Any deal that you give Saquon, I think you have to protect yourself. And I don't think John Mara would ever say to Joe Shane, if you have a walk away number, I'm going to overrule you and we're going to sign him regardless of what the price is. I don't think that would happen. But I do think if I'm Joe Shane, I'm mindful of the fact that my ownership would really like to see the guy stay.
Right, right. I mean, if I'm Joe Shane, obviously I'd be mindful of what's said, but I would also have I don't want to say argument, but a rebuttal as to why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking. However it is he's going to be thinking, especially if he disagrees.
Let me just say this, Patty. I did think it was interesting when Joe was asked about Saquon the other day. The first thing he did was talk about the salary cap and talk about divvying up the pie. He made it 100% apparent that he's not just writing Saquon Barkley a blank check, that Saquon Barkley's going to have to take what the Giants are comfortable giving him, and that Barkley's not going to drive the price tag.
Right. No, absolutely. And I caught that too. And I also, Shane also admitted that there's, the two sides weren't close when they spoke back in the bye week. So, all right, Ed, coming up next, we're going to talk about the other side of the ball. And then we also have to talk about the coaching real quick. Don't go anywhere, Giant fans. We'll be right back. Hey, Giant fans, the NFL playoffs are still here, even though the Giants are out of them. And we at the Locked On NFL Network are really excited about our new sports betting partner, FanDuel, the #1 sports book in America. If you're new to FanDuel, they have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. FanDuel has all your favorite bets, from the money line to point spreads to player props and more. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. New customers join today to get started with $150 in free bets when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey, Giant fans, in case you didn't know, I'm on social media. You probably know that I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Patricia_Traina, TRAINA. But I'm also on Instagram. You can check me out @PattyTraina, PATTITRAINA. And the Locked On Giants podcast also has a brand new Instagram account. That's Locked On Giants, @Locked On Giants. We're posting pictures, quotes, stats, news bits, video clips, audio clips, all kinds of cool things. You'll want to check that out. Give us a like and a follow, not just here on the YouTube page, but also follow us on Instagram. Again, the Locked On Giants account is @Locked On Giants. And my overall football account that I use is @Patty, PATTITRAINA. Please give me a follow. And thank you so much for your support of the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, your host, joined by Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, and we're talking all things Giants. And Ed, we talked about the offense, specifically Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones in the last segment. Let's shift focus now to the defense. Overall, not a horrible showing by the defense, but quite a few holes there. Not, you've got to divvy up the pot, as you said last segment. Where would you prioritize the offseason needs as far as restocking or reinforcing the defense?
Oh, there are three, Patty. There are three. There's cornerback, which everybody talks about. And look, Adoree Jackson's a good player. Fabian Moreau had a nice year. but you need more because the NFL is not just about covering and tackling. Okay. The NFL is about making difference-making plays. The NFL is about turnovers. Adoree Jackson is terrific, but Adoree Jackson has 3 interceptions in 88 career NFL games. He's not a game-changing corner. All right. The Giants don't have one of those. I don't know how they find one in this draft or in free agency, but it would be really nice if they had one. I don't know that they're sold on Darnay Holmes in the slot. I don't know that you can count on Aaron Robinson after 2 injury-plagued years. I think they like Nick McLeod, but can Nick McLeod be a full-time player? I don't know. So you need more at corner. You obviously need more at linebacker. People have asked me all year long, what's the biggest problem with the Giants' run defense? The biggest problem with the Giants' run defense is that basically, to me, although there are other problems, the biggest one for me is, do they have a linebacker that you actually want on the field? Do you have a linebacker who can actually step into a gap and make a play, who can actually beat a block and make a play, who can actually run with a tight end in coverage? They don't have anybody on that roster who you actually want playing every down. And that's a problem. And the third problem, Patty, I wrote this the other day. Dexter Lawrence is a great player. Leonard Williams is a great player, although aging, and although we saw him miss games for the first time in his career this year and entering his 9th season in the NFL, I'm sorry, that's not going to get better. He's going to start missing games. He's been incredibly durable, still a really good player, but you have to think that as he gets older, durability becomes an issue. And I cannot get the picture out of my head from Saturday night of Jason Kelce driving Justin Ellis, 350-pound Justin Ellis, driving him into the turf at Lincoln Financial Field when the Giants tried to give Dexter Lawrence a rest. I can't get that picture out of my head. The Giants need more talent along the defensive front. Philadelphia on Saturday was able to bring just waves and waves of defensive linemen at the Giants. When the Giants tried to rest their players, they got destroyed. And so for me, those are the 3 areas that you've got to focus on. You've got to focus on corner, you've got to focus on linebacker, you've got to find real quality players instead of practice squad guys, undrafted rookie free agents. You've got to find quality players to bring off the bench to give Dexter Lawrence a rest. I thought as great a player as Dexter Lawrence is, Dexter Lawrence is still 24 years old, I think, Patty. I think he's 24, maybe 25, on his rookie contract. The Giants spent the second half of the season giving him veteran rest days on Wednesdays. And that's how telling is that they're overworking this guy.
Mm-hmm.
At 24, 25 years of age, he's getting veteran rest days, which he probably needed. But you've got to put him in a situation where he doesn't have to do everything on that defensive line.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And he developed, I think, a back issue, if I'm not mistaken, which is why they had to give him some of those rest days to manage that. And one thing we haven't really spoken about is the coaching situation. Now, Dable was asked if he planned on making any changes to his staff, and of course, he wasn't going to say right then and there what he was thinking of doing. I want to take this into 2 parts here. I want to talk about guys who maybe might not be back next year. And then I want to talk about the 2 coordinators who are being courted for head coaching jobs around the league and how they recover from that. But let's start off with any position coaches or, coordinators that may not be back next year. Are you thinking that maybe Thomas McGahee might be on the, on, I don't want to say thin ice, but might be somebody they might look to swap out?
Oh, Patty, you're killing me because you that's exactly where I was going to go. To be honest with you, I think that the Giants have a terrific staff. Okay, they have a terrific veteran, highly successful coaching staff. The one thing that you can look at, and I love T-Mac. T-Mac's a stand-up guy. I love,
Mhm.
he's a guy that's been there through how many coaches is it now? Was he
Goes
hired
back to
by
No, McAdoo,
was
right?
was he
And he
I don't know
or
that
was
he
he
was
with
I think he was hired first by Shermer, but
Okay.
it's at least 3 coaching staffs. It might be 4. I'd have to go back and look, but he's a really good special teams coach. And yet you just keep looking at the production on special teams, and it's just not there.
Yeah.
It's just not there. I thought he was very stubborn this year about the idea that Gary Brightwell could be a kickoff returner
Yeah.
because I don't see it. I'm
Right.
sorry, Gary Brightwell. And what tells you that the rest of the league doesn't think that Gary Brightwell is a kickoff returner is that the rest of the league kept forcing Gary Brightwell to return kicks. They kept kicking short and forcing Gary Brightwell to return kicks, and the ball was almost never getting past the 25-yard line.
Right.
We just, to me, there's for a veteran special teams coach, a guy that is as good as T-Mac, there were blocked punts. There were too many breakdowns for me. So I think that if Brian Daboll makes any coaching staff changes, I think you're absolutely right. I think the one to keep an eye on is special teams. I wonder, to be honest with you, Patty. I know that T-Mac's son, I think, is a college football player now. I have wondered, and it's I even hate to say it, but I have wondered if T-Mac is if his heart's in it the way that it used to be. I've just wondered. I've wondered about that, but and that's really probably not a great thing to say without actually sitting down and talking to T-Mac about that. But I do think that that's the one spot that the Giants might look at.
Yeah. Especially considering that it's been consistent. It's not like it was just this year. Last couple of
It's been
years,
ongoing. Yeah.
yeah, you could say you can make the argument the last couple of years that maybe Joe Judge stuck his hand in the pot, but this year there's really
Yeah,
been no
it's
excuses.
it's been a continuing thing for the last 3 or 4 years. And
Yeah.
like you, I think I was looking at it. I was hoping, expecting, waiting to see better special teams play this year when T-Mac was allowed to just make his own decisions and do it his way. And I really don't think we saw that.
No, I think that's fair to say. All right, Ed, before we wrap up, let's talk real quick about the coordinators. As I mentioned, Mike Kafka, Wink Martindale being courted. Martindale, so far as all we know, is he's been requested by the Colts, who have a wide net. Kafka, on the other hand, has a little bit more interest around the league. He's going, or he will have gone for his second interview with Houston. If the Giants lose him, and I don't know if that's going to happen this year. I think eventually, yes, Kafka will get a head coaching job. I'd be surprised if it happens this year. But if it does happen, what do you do for your Brian Daboll? Do you promote somebody from within? Maybe move up Shea Tierney. And then there was a report that Davis Webb is looking to transition from a player to a coach and hire him to be the quarterback's coach. Or if you're Daboll, who has been a successful play caller in the past, do you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take over the play calling, make Shea Tierney sort of like my offensive coordinator, but more of a consultant role. I mean, what approach do you take if you lose Kafka? We'll start there first.
Oh, I think that is the really interesting question. I think that when Brian Daboll was able to bring Mike Kafka in, I think that it was apparent, Kafka was already getting head coaching interest. It was apparent, and he wasn't allowed to call plays in Kansas City. It was apparent that Mike Kafka was ready to be a play caller. And Brian Daboll stepped back and allowed Kafka to do that. And I think that was a big part of the reason why Brian Daboll was so successful this year. He coached the entire team. Is Shea Tierney ready to take a step up and be a play caller? Is Mike Groh, the wide receiver coach, who was offensive coordinator for 2 years in Philly, although he was offensive coordinator while Doug Peterson was play caller, is Mike Groh, ready to call plays? I think the last thing that Brian Daboll wants to do is go outside and start changing this offense again. I think this is still, even with Kafka calling the plays, this was at its heart Brian Daboll's offense, Brian Daboll's basic playbook, his scheme, his philosophy. And I don't think Brian Daboll wants that to change, especially since they made a lot of inroads this year. So it wouldn't surprise me, unless there's somebody out there who's available who Brian Daboll is very, very comfortable with and who will come in and run Daboll's offense. It wouldn't surprise me if he goes that route, promote a Shea Tierney, promote a Mike Groh, and at least in the interim, at least for a year, take that play calling himself until he's comfortable that a guy like Shea Tierney might be ready to take that responsibility. So, I mean, it's comforting, to be honest with you, to have a guy that's been that successful, doing it, to be able to take that role. But you and I have talked about this a million times, Patty. I am much more comfortable with a head coach being a CEO. I think Joe Shane is as well. Joe has made that preference known. So I think if Daboll were to do that, I don't think it's a long-term thing. I think it's more of I don't have a guy I think is quite ready yet. Let me help him along by doing this for a year and seeing where it goes.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. All right. If they lose Wink, Drew Wilkins has been mentioned as a possible guy to move up. How do you see that playing out if Wink goes?
Well, the funny part about Drew Wilkins, the funny part about that, and I've been thinking about this a lot. If Wink Martindale goes, Drew Wilkins has been with Wink Martindale for a decade now. If Wink Martindale goes, I think Drew Wilkins goes with him. I think Drew Wilkins, whether Wink becomes the de facto defensive play caller or not, I would guess that Drew Wilkins, who would be a great natural successor to Wink with the Giants, I think if Wink goes, I think Wilkins is his defensive coordinator wherever he goes, which I think you're then left with looking at your coaching staff. I think Andre Patterson, who's the defensive line coach, has been a defensive coordinator before. Andre, I'm not sure that's the best role for him. I wonder if a guy like Jerome Henderson would finally get a shot at being a defensive coordinator. I think the defense would change under Jerome Henderson. He's a former NFL corner. He's been a defensive backs coach his entire career. I would venture to guess, although we've never seen it, I would venture to guess that his philosophy might end up being more coverage oriented than pressure oriented. But he's the one I look at if you're going to stay internal, as a possible successor. After that, I really don't know who Daboll would look at, but that's my biggest fear if Wink goes, is that Wilkins goes with him.
That's a good point, and not one that a lot of people have definitely spoken about. Ed, it's going to be a very interesting and busy off season. I appreciate you taking the time to help me break down the 2022 year and to look ahead as we get ready for 2023, a very busy 2023. I know you'll be cranking out content over on Big Blue View, as will I here on Locked On Giants and on Giants Country. So thank you for coming on with me. Giant fans, thank you for tuning into the Locked On Giants podcast. Plenty more to come as we continue our 5-day-a-week broadcast schedule. We hope you will be a part of it on the upcoming shows, interviews, analysis, all kinds of cool stuff coming up here on Locked On Giants. For Ed Valentine, I'm Patricia Traina. Everybody have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon.